Captain Hyunwoo gripped the controls of his escape pod as it shook like a leaf in a storm. The small metal box that was supposed to save his life now felt like his tomb as it fell through the thick atmosphere of an unknown planet. His military transport ship had been destroyed just minutes ago by enemy fighters from the Corvan Empire, and now he was alone falling toward a world that did not even appear on any star maps. The pod screamed through clouds of purple and gold as alien winds tried to tear it apart. Warning lights flashed red all around him, telling him things he already knew. The heat shields were failing. The navigation system was broken, and he had maybe 12 hours of air left to breathe. His ribs hurt badly from when the enemy missiles had hit his ship and warm blood was running down his face from a cut on his forehead. Through the small window, he could see a world covered in strange forests with trees that seemed to glow with their own light. The leaves were not green like on Earth, but shimmered with colors of blue and silver, like someone had painted them with starlight. Rivers of bright water wound through the landscape like glowing snakes, and in the distance, tall mountains reached up toward 3 moons that hung in the alien sky. The ground was coming up fast now, and Hyunwoo knew this was going to hurt. He pulled the emergency straps tight across his chest and said a quick prayer to whatever gods might be listening. The pod hit the top branches of the forest, with a sound like thunder breaking through the alien trees and sending strange birds flying in all directions. Their calls sounded like music boxes, playing broken songs. Branch after branch slapped against the pod's hull as it crashed downward, leaving a trail of broken wood and scattered leaves that glowed as they fell. Finally, the pod slammed into the forest floor with an impact that made Hyunwoo's teeth rattle and his vision go dark for a moment. When he opened his eyes again, smoke was filling the small space, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He tried to move, but his left arm would not work right, and every breath sent sharp pain through his chest. The communication system was completely dead, with sparks coming from the control panel. His weapons were still working, but what good would one pistol do against an entire unknown world? The life support system showed a red warning that made his heart sink. He had less than 10 hours of breathable air remaining outside the pod. He could hear sounds that no human had ever heard before. Strange clicking noises echoed through the forest, along with what sounded like wind chimes made of crystal. There were footsteps too, but they were too light to be from any creature. He knew about whatever lived on this world was already coming to investigate the crash as the alien sun began to set. The sounds grew closer. Hyunwoo could hear multiple creatures moving through the underbrush, making soft communication sounds to each other. They were being careful not making much noise as they approached his crash site. Through the cracked window, he could see shadows moving between the glowing trees, but he could not make out what they looked like. His hand moved toward his weapon, but then he stopped and thought about it. If these aliens were hostile, one gun would not save him, but if they were peaceful, then pointing a weapon at them would be the worst first impression he could make. He was alone, hurt, and completely dependent on whatever kind of beings lived on this world. His only hope was that they might be willing to help a stranger. The footsteps stopped just outside his pod, and Hyunwoo held his breath. He could hear whispered conversations in a language that sounded like water flowing over stones mixed with the tinkling of small bells. Then something tapped gently on the hull of his escape pod. 3 soft knocks, like someone politely asking to come inside. Through the damaged window, he saw his first glimpse of the aliens, and his breath caught in his throat. They were unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. The beings stood about 4 feet tall, with skin that looked like it was made from living crystal. Their bodies seemed to glow softly, with their own inner light making them look like walking gemstones in the fading daylight. Their faces were the most beautiful and strange thing he had ever seen. Large eyes that looked like cut diamonds reflected the emergency lights from his pod. In rainbow patterns, their features were delicate and graceful, like someone had carved them from precious stone, but there was intelligence and curiosity in those alien eyes that told him these were thinking, feeling beings, the closest alien which, he would later learn, was named Binu, placed one translucent hand against the hull of the pod. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if the being understood that someone was hurt inside and needed help. Then came more soft tapping sounds, a careful rhythm that seemed to be asking if anyone was alive in the crashed vessel. Hyun Woo realized they were trying to communicate with him to see if he was still breathing inside his metal tomb. He raised his good hand and tapped back against the wall, using the same rhythm he had heard. The effect was immediate. The aliens began making excited musical sounds to each other, and more gentle tapping came from outside. More crystal beings appeared around his pod, at least 6 or 7 of them, all looking concerned and curious. They seemed to be discussing what to do about the strange visitor who had fallen from the sky. Their voices were like a chorus of wind chimes playing a complex melody that somehow conveyed emotion, even though he could not understand the words. One of the aliens, a smaller one with skin that glowed more brightly than the others, approached the pod window and looked directly at Hyun Woo. Their eyes met through the cracked glass, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than language. The alien placed both hands against the window and made soft, cooing sounds that somehow conveyed comfort and reassurance. The beings began working together to find a way to open the damaged pod. Their tools looked like they had been grown from living plants rather than manufactured from metal, long, flexible vines that could bend in impossible ways and seemed to know exactly how to manipulate the pod mechanisms without causing more damage. It was clear these aliens had technology, but it was unlike anything humans had developed as they worked. Hyun Woo felt hope beginning to grow in his chest. These creatures had not run away from his crashed pod or tried to attack him. Instead, they were carefully trying to rescue him from what could have been his tomb. They moved with purpose and intelligence, working together like they had done this kind of rescue before. The pod door finally opened with a hiss of escaping air, and cool alien atmosphere flowed in, carrying scents of flowers he had never smelled, and growing things that seemed to pulse with life. The crystal beings looked at him with those diamond eyes full of concern and curiosity, and Hyun Woo knew that his life had just taken a turn he could never have imagined. He tried to speak to thank them, but only a whisper came out. The closest alien, the one called Binu, made gentle sounds and reached out with careful hands to help him from the wreckage. This was the beginning of a friendship that would one day shake the foundations of the galaxy itself. Binu and 3 other crystal beings carefully lifted Hyun Woo from his damaged escape pod. Their hands felt warm despite looking like living glass, and they moved him with the gentleness of people who understood pain. The forest around them was filled with the soft music of alien night sounds, and the glow from their skin cast dancing shadows on the strange trees. They carried him along paths that seemed to grow beneath their feet, made of living wood that bent and shaped itself to make walking easier. The trees above them pulsed with gentle light like a heartbeat, and sweet-smelling flowers opened as they passed, releasing scents that made Hyun-woo feel calmer despite his injuries. The Keltaran village was unlike anything Hyun-woo had ever imagined in his wildest dreams. Their homes were not built but grown from massive trees that had been shaped over many years into comfortable living spaces. Windows and doors appeared naturally in the wood, and soft moss carpeted the floors. Inside, streams of crystal-clear water flowed through channels carved into the living architecture, providing fresh drinking water to every home. The crystal beings brought him to a large treehouse that seemed to serve as their medical center. A young female Keltaran with skin that glowed like moonlight approached them. Her name was Yoonji, though Hyun-woo would not learn this for several days. She had the most gentle touch he had ever experienced as she examined his injuries, making soft, concerned sounds at the cuts and bruises covering his body. Yoonji brought out containers made from hollowed gourds filled with paste that looked like liquid starlight. When she applied it to his wounds, the pain disappeared immediately, and he could actually feel his cuts beginning to heal. The paste tingled against his skin and seemed to know exactly where he was hurt, working its way into every scrape and bruise. The other Keltarans gathered around to watch their healer work, but they kept a respectful distance, giving Hyun-woo space while showing their curiosity about this strange visitor from the stars. They spoke to each other in their musical language, pointing at his clothes, his hair, and his skin with the wonder of children seeing something amazing for the first time. Over the following days, Hyun-woo began to understand just how remarkable these beings were. They had no weapons anywhere in their village, not even simple knives for cutting food. Instead, they used their hands and tools grown from plants to shape and harvest everything they needed. Their entire way of life was built around growing things and helping them flourish. Taemin, the village elder, was the oldest Keltaran Hyun-woo had seen. His crystal skin had taken on deeper colors with age, showing veins of gold and silver that made him look like a living treasure. He spent hours sitting beside Hyun-woo's bed, teaching him basic words in their language, while learning simple Korean phrases in return. The old being had patience that seemed endless, never getting frustrated when Hyun-woo mispronounced their flowing words or failed to understand their complex grammar. Instead, Taemin would smile with those diamond eyes and try a different way to explain. Always encouraging and kind, Yoonji became Hyun-woo's constant companion during his recovery. She would arrive each morning with fresh healing paste and new lessons in their language. Her voice was like water flowing over smooth stones, and she had a way of making even the most difficult concepts seem simple. When she laughed at his clumsy attempts to speak Keltaran, it was never cruel but full of warmth and encouragement. As his injuries healed, Hyun-woo began to help around the village. His human strength surprised the Keltarans, who were built for grace rather than power. He could lift heavy stones they struggled with, and his different perspective helped them solve problems they had worked on for years. The bridge over the main stream had been damaged in a storm, and Hyun-woo showed them how to use leverage and simple engineering to repair it quickly. In return, the Keltarans shared their incredible knowledge of biotechnology. They showed him plants that could produce any medicine, needed just by singing to them in the right way. Trees that could grow into any shape desired with patience and proper guidance. Flowers that could store energy from their 3 suns and release it as light during the dark hours. Their entire civilization was a masterpiece of harmony between intelligence and nature. They had achieved something that humans with all their advanced technology had never managed, a way of living that helped their world grow more beautiful instead of destroying it. There, cities were gardens, and their gardens were works of art that fed both body and soul. But as Hyunwoo learned more about the Kelterans, he began to worry about their innocence. They had never known war or hatred or greed. The concept of someone taking things by force was completely foreign to them. When he tried to explain about armies and weapons and conquest, they looked at him with confusion and sadness, unable to understand why anyone would want to hurt others. Binu, who had become like a brother to him, asked many questions about the wider galaxy beyond their peaceful world. Hyunwoo found himself struggling to explain the brutal realities of interstellar politics without destroying their beautiful faith in the goodness of all living beings. How could he tell them about the Corvan Empire and their slave raids without breaking their hearts? The Keltarans had developed amazing technology, but it was all focused on creation and healing rather than destruction. Their ships were grown from living wood and crystal, and could travel between stars, but they had no shields or weapons because they had never imagined needing them. Their entire space program was dedicated to finding new worlds where they could plant gardens and help life flourish. During long evening conversations under their glowing trees, Taemin shared the history of his people. They had achieved peace thousands of years ago. After learning that violence only created more violence, their ancestors had made a choice to put down their weapons forever and dedicate themselves to nurturing life instead of destroying it. It was a beautiful philosophy, and Hyunwoo found himself deeply moved by their commitment to harmony and growth, but his military training made him constantly aware of how vulnerable they were. Their trust in the goodness of strangers was both their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness. At night, when the 3 moons rose over the glowing forest, Hyunwoo would lie in his comfortable bed made from living moss and worry about what would happen if the wrong people ever found this paradise. The Keltarans had resources that would be incredibly valuable to the right buyer. Their biotechnology alone could revolutionize medicine and agriculture across the galaxy. But more than that, they had achieved something even more precious than technology. They had found a way to live without fear or hatred or the constant struggle for power that consumed most civilizations. Their very existence proved that peace was possible, that intelligence could be used for creation rather than destruction. As the weeks passed and his strength returned, Hyunwoo found himself changed by his time with the Keltarans. Their gentle wisdom and unshakable faith in the goodness of life had touched something deep in his soul. He had come to this world as a soldier trained for war, but he was becoming something different, something better under their influence. Yoonji taught him to listen to the songs that plants sang when they were happy and healthy. Binu showed him how to shape living wood with patience and gentle pressure. Taemin shared ancient stories about the connection between all living things and the responsibility that came with intelligence and power. But even as Hyunwoo learned to see the galaxy through Keltaran eyes, his soldier instincts never fully relaxed. He kept watch over their peaceful village, knowing that their isolation could not last forever. Somewhere out in the darkness, between stars, there were those who would see the Keltarans not as the beautiful souls they were, but as prey to be hunted and resources to be harvested. His fears would prove to be more prophetic than he could have imagined. 3 months after Hyunwoo's crash landing, the peaceful skies of Keltara were torn apart by the arrival of massive warships. The Corvan Empire had finally tracked the energy signature from his destroyed transport, and come to investigate what they thought would be an empty world. Instead, they found something far more valuable than they had ever dreamed. Commander Doc Ho stood on the bridge of his flagship looking down at the glowing forests and crystal cities with the cold eyes of a predator who had found perfect prey. His scarred face showed satisfaction as his sensors revealed a planet rich in rare minerals, biotechnology beyond anything in the known galaxy, and a population that appeared to have no military defenses whatsoever. Corvan Empire had built its power on the suffering of others, conquering weak civilizations and taking everything of value they could find. Their ships were dark metal monsters, bristling with weapons designed for destruction and intimidation. They had enslaved dozens of species across the galaxy, turning entire worlds into factories and mining operations. Hyun-woo watched in growing horror as the first landing craft descended toward the village like black insects against the beautiful alien sky. He tried desperately to explain to Bennu and the other Keltarans what was coming, but they could not understand the concept of beings who would harm others for personal gain. Their innocent minds simply could not grasp such evil, the crystal beings. Gathered in their main meeting hall discussing this strange development with the same calm curiosity they showed for everything else. Taemin asked thoughtful questions about these visitors, wondering what gifts they might bring and what knowledge could be shared between their peoples. So young a young Keltaran who had become fluent in Korean during Hyun-woo's stay served as translator when the Corvan troops marched into the village. Their heavy boots crushed the delicate moss paths, and their weapons left scorch marks on the living wood of the houses. The soldiers were surprised to find a human among the aliens, but quickly dismissed him as a marooned survivor of no importance. The Corvan demands were delivered with brutal simplicity. The Keltarans would provide tribute in the form of their biotechnology rare minerals from their world and 20% of their population as workers for Corvan factories. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of their civilization. They had 7 standard days to begin compliance. Bennu listened to this ultimatum with growing confusion, asking So Young to repeat the translation several times because surely she must have made some mistake. The concept of forced labor was so foreign to Keltaran, thinking that they needed the words explained like parents trying to understand a child speaking nonsense. Hyun-woo felt his blood turn to ice as he watched these gentle beings struggle with ideas that no civilized person should ever have to understand. How do you explain slavery to people who had never even raised their voices in anger? How do you describe systematic cruelty to beings whose entire culture was built on nurturing and growth? The Corvan soldiers set up their base camp in the center of the village using heavy machinery that tore up the carefully tended gardens and poisoned the streams with chemical runoff. They brought in processing equipment designed to extract and catalog everything of value on the planet, from the rarest minerals to the most advanced biotechnology. Commander Doc Ho walked through the village like a farmer inspecting livestock, pointing at different Keltarans and making notes about which ones would be most useful as workers. The younger, stronger ones would go to the mining operations, while the elderly and children would be left behind to maintain basic food production. That night, the Keltarans held emergency councils in their glowing tree houses, trying to understand this impossible situation. Taemin asked Hyun-woo to explain the concept of ownership, of taking things that belong to others by force. The old being's diamond eyes filled with tears as he began to grasp the horrible reality of what was happening to his people. Some of the younger Keltarans suggested they could simply leave their world and find another planet where they could live in peace. But Hyun-woo had to explain that the Corvans would follow them wherever they went, that their ships were faster, and their weapons more powerful than anything the Keltarans could imagine. Yunji sat beside Hyunwoo during these dark discussions, holding his hand with her warm crystal fingers. She asked him why the Corvans were angry with them, what terrible thing the Keltarans had done to deserve such treatment. When he explained that they had done nothing wrong, that they were being punished simply for existing and having things others wanted, she could not stop crying. The worst part was watching the Keltarans try to find ways to appease their captors. Binu offered to share their healing technology, freely believing that if the Corvans understood how much good it could do, they would surely change their minds. Taemin suggested they could teach the soldiers about harmony and growth, helping them find better ways to live. But Commander Dak Ho had no interest in harmony or growth. He wanted profit and power, and the Keltarans were nothing more than obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. His soldiers began taking hostages to encourage compliance, grabbing Keltaran children and elderly beings at random and holding them in crude cages made from scrap metal. Yunji was among the first captured, along with several village youngsters who had tried to comfort the human prisoners with songs and gentle touches. The sight of her behind bars with bruises on her crystal skin, where rough hands had grabbed her, filled Hyunwoo with a rage unlike anything he had ever felt. He begged Binu to let him try to rescue the hostages, to use his military training to fight back against the Corvans. But the Keltaran elder refused to allow violence even to save their own people. Their philosophy of absolute non-violence was so deeply ingrained that they would rather die than compromise their beliefs. It was a moral strength that Hyunwoo both admired and found desperately frustrating. These beautiful souls would let themselves and their children be enslaved rather than raise a hand in anger. Their commitment to peace was absolute, even when peace meant extinction. As the deadline approached, more Corvan ships arrived in orbit, bringing mining equipment, slave processing facilities, and construction materials for permanent occupation. It became clear that this was not just a raid, but the beginning of a complete takeover of Keltaran civilization. Commander Dak Ho announced that the most valuable Keltarans would be transported to other worlds, where their skills could be put to better use. The biotechnology experts would go to research facilities, while the strongest workers would be sent to asteroid mining operations. The rest would remain on Keltara as caretakers for the new Corvan colony. That night, Taemin came to Hyunwoo with tears streaming down his ancient face. The old being had been thinking deeply about human concepts of justice and protection. He told Hyunwoo that while his people could never resort to violence themselves, they would not condemn others who fought to protect innocent lives. It was the closest thing to permission for warfare that the peaceful Keltarans could give. Hyunwoo spent the rest of the night teaching trusted villagers how to hide in the deep cave systems when the fighting began. He had no idea if help was coming, but he was prepared to make his last stand defending the people who had become his family. As dawn broke on what might be the final day of Keltaran freedom, Hyunwoo activated the emergency beacon in his damaged escape pod. The signal was weak and fragmented, but it carried his authentication codes and a desperate message about innocent people facing slavery. The beacon broadcast on all human military frequencies, sending its plea into the darkness between stars. He did not know if anyone would receive the message or if help could arrive in time. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. These gentle beings had saved his life when they could have left him to die in his crashed pod. Now it was his turn to try to save them, even if it cost him everything. In the distance, energy signatures began appearing at the edge of the solar system. Something was coming through hyperspace, and it was coming fast. Admiral Ji-hoon was reviewing patrol reports in his command center when the emergency beacon signal reached his fleet. The transmission was weak and broken by static, but the authentication codes were genuine and the voice was unmistakably that of Captain Hyun-woo, a soldier the Admiral had personally decorated for heroism during the brutal Battle of Centauri Prime. The message itself made Ji-hoon's blood run cold. A peaceful civilization was about to be enslaved by Corvan raiders, and one of his own officers was trapped among them, calling for help. The personal recording embedded in the beacon spoke of crystal-skinned beings who had saved Hyun-woo's life and nursed him back to health with nothing but kindness and compassion within. 30 minutes of receiving the transmission, Admiral Ji-hoon had issued emergency mobilization orders to every human ship within 3-star systems. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captains who had been planning shore leave canceled. Their plans, crews who had been looking forward to rest, volunteered for extended duty. Every human who heard the story wanted to be part of the rescue mission. The fleet that assembled was the largest human military force deployed in over a decade. 5 heavy battle cruisers led by Ji-hoon's flagship, 12 fast attack destroyers, 3 specialized assault carriers filled with elite troops, and 2 hospital ships equipped to handle massive casualties. The Admiral had called in every favor owed to him and stretched his authority to its limits. But more than ships and weapons, Admiral Ji-hoon brought with him something far more powerful, the righteous fury of human beings who understood that one of their own had been helped by strangers, and those strangers were now in mortal danger. The crews knew this was not just a military operation, but a sacred duty to repay a debt of honor. Captain Mi Kyung commanded the elite special forces aboard the assault carriers her teams had trained. For exactly this kind of mission, rescuing hostages from superior enemy forces in hostile territory, she studied every detail Hyun-woo had transmitted about Corvan tactics and Keltaran geography, preparing for what might be the most important battle of her career. Back on Keltara, the situation was growing worse by the hour. Commander Doc Ho had grown impatient with Keltaran attempts to negotiate and compromise. He ordered his troops to begin systematic collection of hostages to encourage faster compliance with his demands. The crystal beings were herded into makeshift prison camps while Corvan engineers began dismantling their beautiful living architecture. Yunji and the other captives were forced to watch as their glowing trees were cut down and their carefully tended gardens were bulldozed to make room for processing facilities. The Corvans seemed to take special pleasure in destroying beautiful things, as if the very existence of harmony and peace was an insult to their way of life. Hyun-woo felt helpless rage building in his chest as he watched the systematic destruction of everything the Keltarans had built over thousands of years. Their entire civilization was being erased, not because it was necessary for Corvan survival, but simply because it was profitable. The cold calculation behind such cruelty was almost harder to bear than random violence. The Keltaran children were the hardest to watch. They had never seen cruelty before and could not understand why. These strangers were hurting their families. Some of the youngest ones still tried to offer gifts to their captors, bringing them flowers and trying to sing the soothing songs their parents had taught them. The Corvan soldiers just laughed and threw. The flowers in the mud Taemin was among the hostages selected for transportation to the slave facilities. His ancient wisdom and deep knowledge of biotechnology made him extremely valuable to Corvan researchers as they loaded him into the transport ship. He looked back at Hyun-woo with those diamond eyes full of sadness, but not hatred. Even facing slavery, the old being could not bring himself to wish harm on his captors. So Young had become the reluctant translator between the Corvins and her. People watching her translate threats and ultimatums that broke her heart with every word. She approached Hyun-woo during one of the brief rest periods, asking him if he truly believed help was coming. The hope in her voice was painful to hear. Hyun-woo could only tell her what he felt in his heart, that humans did not abandon those who had shown them kindness. He explained how his people remembered every debt of honor, how they would cross the galaxy to help a friend in need. So Young listened, with tears in her multifaceted eyes, wanting desperately to believe, but knowing how vast space was and how small their world seemed. The Corvin occupation force continued to grow as more ships arrived, bringing specialized equipment for long-term. Exploitation mining platforms were deployed in orbit around Keltara, while ground teams began systematic survey of every natural resource. Slave processing centers were constructed with the efficient brutality that came from years of practice. Commander Doc-ho established his headquarters in what had been the Keltarans' most sacred space, a grove of ancient trees where they had held ceremonies for generations. The living wood was cut down and replaced with prefabricated metal structures that hummed. With mechanical noise, the streams that had carried pure water through the grove were diverted to cool the Corvin machinery. But even as the occupation tightened its grip, something was happening at the edge of the solar system. Energy signatures were appearing in the deep space monitoring stations, ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. The Corvin sensors detected them first, and Commander Doc-ho was summoned to his command center with urgent reports. What he saw on the tactical display made his confidence falter for the first time since arriving at Keltara. 18 human warships were advancing toward the planet in battle formation. Their energy signatures indicated heavy cruisers and assault carriers, the kind of force that could destroy his entire fleet. The humans had not come to negotiate. The commander's immediate instinct was to flee, but retreat would mean facing the wrath of his Corvin superiors who did not tolerate failure. His career, and possibly his life, depended on completing this mission successfully. He made the fatal decision to use the Keltaran hostages as shields, believing that humans would not risk harming innocent civilians. Admiral Ji-hoon received the Corvin ultimatum with cold fury. Commander, Doc-ho threatened to execute one hostage every hour unless the human fleet withdrew immediately. The transmission included video of Yoon-ji and other captives bound and helpless in the Corvin prison camps. Their gentle faces showed confusion and fear, but not the broken despair their captors had expected. The Admiral's response was swift and precise. Instead of negotiating, he deployed his special forces for immediate insertion. Captain Mi-kyung and her teams used advanced stealth technology to approach the planet undetected. Their orders were simple: rescue every hostage without a single casualty. The mission would require perfect timing and flawless execution. Hyun-woo watched from his hiding place in the village as brilliant flashes of light began appearing in the night sky. The space battle had begun, and he could tell from the patterns of light that human ships were systematically destroying Corvin vessels. The sound of explosions echoed through the atmosphere as burning debris streaked overhead like falling stars. The Keltarans emerged from their shelters to watch the light show, many of them seeing space combat for the first time in their lives. They asked Hyun-woo what was happening, and when he explained that his people had come to help them, The crystal beings began to weep with relief and gratitude. Their faith in the goodness of strangers had been restored on the ground. Captain Mi Kyung's teams moved like ghosts through the Corvin positions they had, studied every detail of the facility layouts that Hyunwoo had provided, and they knew exactly where each group of hostages was being held. The rescue operation began with surgical precision as human soldiers appeared seemingly from nowhere to overwhelm the guards. The first hostages were freed within minutes of the ground assault beginning. Yoonji found herself suddenly surrounded by human soldiers in advanced armor who spoke to her in careful Keltaran phrases they had learned from Hyunwoo's transmissions. They lifted her gently from her cage and carried her to safety, with the same compassion her people had shown to their injured friend. Commander Dakho realized too late that he had made a terrible mistake in threatening people that humans cared about. The rescue operation was unlike anything in Corvin military doctrine. The human soldiers moved with a combination of advanced technology and pure determination that overwhelmed his forces completely. As the last hostages were freed and the final Corvin ships were destroyed or captured, Hyunwoo ran through the village to find Yoonji waiting for him at the evacuation point. Tears of relief flowed from her diamond eyes as she saw that her human friend had kept his promise. That help would come. The reunion between Hyunwoo and the Keltarans he had learned to love was witnessed by hundreds of human troops, and the story spread through the fleet like wildfire. Here was proof of what they had all believed that showing kindness to a human in need was an investment in the protection of an entire species that never forgot its debts. But Admiral Ji-hoon was not finished with his mission. The attack on Keltara had been launched from a major Corvin military base in the neighboring system, and he intended to make sure this could never happen again. The human fleet that dropped out of hyperspace above Keltara was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in generations. Admiral Ji-hoon's ships moved with the precision of a surgical instrument, but carried the fury of a storm that had been building. For months, word of the Keltaran rescue had spread through human space like wildfire, and every military commander wanted to be part of what came next. Captain Mi Kyung's special forces had completed their mission with 0 casualties among the hostages, but the admiral was far from satisfied. The intelligence gathered from captured Corvin officers revealed the location of every slave processing center mining operation and military installation within 50 light years. It was a network of suffering that had operated in the shadows for decades. Admiral Ji-hoon stood on his bridge looking at the tactical display that showed the extent of Corvin operations in this sector of space. Dozens of installations, dozens of worlds where innocent beings were being worked to death in mines and factories. The rescue of Keltara had been just the beginning of something much larger. The Admiral made a decision that would reshape the balance of power across multiple star systems. He was not going to just defend the Keltarans. He was going to make sure that no one would ever again dare to threaten those who had shown kindness to a human being. The Corvin Empire was about to learn what happened to those who made enemies of humanity. The systematic dismantling of Corvin operations began with military precision, but was driven by something deeper than tactical objectives. Every human crew member knew they were fighting not just for strategic advantage, but for the principle that good deeds should be rewarded and cruelty should be punished. The stories of Keltaran kindness had touched something fundamental in the human spirit. Commander Dakho found himself a prisoner aboard the human flagship, facing interrogation by intelligence officers, who knew exactly which questions to ask. The captured Corvin revealed the locations of hidden bases, secret slave routes, and the identities of every officer involved in the planned enslavement of Keltara. His cooperation was motivated by the growing realization that the humans were not going to stop with one rescue back on Keltara. Something extraordinary was taking place. The grateful Keltarans, led by Binu and Tai Min, began opening their most closely guarded secrets to their human protectors. Biotechnology that could heal mortal wounds in hours, environmental restoration techniques that could bring dead worlds back to life, energy systems that worked in harmony with natural processes rather than destroying them. Yunji became the first Keltaran to leave her homeworld when she volunteered to serve aboard Admiral Ji-hoon's flagship as a cultural liaison and medical advisor. Her presence reminded every human crew member exactly why they were fighting, not for conquest or resources, but to protect those who embodied the best qualities of intelligent life. The young Keltaran healer adapted to life aboard a human warship with the same grace her people showed in everything they did. She established a medical bay using both human technology and Keltaran biotechnology, creating healing capabilities that amazed even the most experienced human doctors. Her gentle presence brought calm to stressed crew members, and her wisdom helped bridge the gap between two very different ways of understanding the universe. So Young joined the effort as well, using her perfect grasp of multiple languages to help coordinate between human forces and the various alien species they encountered in freed slave camps. Her ability to communicate hope and reassurance to terrified prisoners made her invaluable to rescue operations across the sector. The war that followed was unlike any conflict in recorded galactic history. The human forces moved from system to system not as conquerors, but as liberators. Their targets were always military installations, slave processing centers, and resource extraction facilities operated through forced labor. They avoided civilian targets with obsessive care, focusing their fury on those who profited from suffering. Captain Dae Jung, the fleet's intelligence officer, worked closely with freed slaves to identify which installations held prisoners and which were purely military targets. The human approach was surgical in its precision, but devastating. In its scope, every Corvan operation that depended on slave labor was systematically dismantled. The psychological impact on Corvan forces was immediate and profound. They were accustomed to fighting opponents who shared their brutal pragmatism, but humans motivated by genuine moral outrage were something entirely different. Human soldiers fought with a combination of advanced technology and absolute conviction that made them nearly unstoppable. News of the human campaign spread across the galaxy faster than the fleets themselves could travel. Other species that had suffered under Corvan oppression began to hope for the first time in decades. Rebel movements that had been crushed years ago suddenly found new strength as word spread that someone was finally standing up to the slavers. The Corvan Empire tried desperately to negotiate, finding themselves facing an enemy that could not be bought, intimidated, or reasoned with. Human diplomatic representatives listened politely to offers of territorial concessions, trade agreements, and tribute payments, then continued their systematic destruction of every Corvan installation involved in slavery. Admiral Ji-hoon received multiple communications from Corvan High Command offering increasingly desperate terms for peace. The final offer included complete withdrawal from the sector, payment of massive reparations, and the release of all slave populations under Corvan control. But the Admiral response was always the same: surrender, completely, or face total destruction. The turning point came when human forces reached the primary Corvan slave processing center in the Vega system. The massive orbital facility held over 10,000 prisoners from dozens of different species, all of them working in conditions that violated every principle of civilized behavior. The rescue operation that followed became legendary. Captain Mi Kyung led the assault, personally coordinating with Eunji and So Young to ensure that every prisoner was safely evacuated before the facility was destroyed. The sight of thousands of beings walking free for the first time in years brought tears to the eyes of hardened soldiers. The rescued prisoners included children who had never known freedom, and elderly beings who thought they would die in captivity. Among the freed slaves were members of species that humans had never encountered before. Each group had their own story of Corvan brutality, but they all shared the same expression of amazement. When they learned that humans had crossed the galaxy to help strangers they had never met. The concept of fighting for others without expectation of reward was foreign to many galactic civilizations. The destruction of the Vega facility sent shockwaves through the Corvan Empire. Their most profitable operation had been eliminated in a matter of hours, and the prisoners who represented decades of investment were now free. The economic impact was staggering, but the psychological damage was even. Worse, Corvan commanders began to question whether their empire could survive a war against an enemy motivated by principle rather than profit. As human forces continued their advance across Corvan territory, they left behind them a trail of liberated worlds and grateful populations. The freed slaves were not abandoned after rescue, but received medical care supplies and transportation to safe worlds. Many chose to stay and help with further liberation efforts, creating a growing coalition of species united by their shared experience of human generosity. Hyun-woo remained on Keltara during most of the campaign, helping to coordinate between human forces and Keltaran support teams. The crystal beings had found ways to contribute to the war effort that did not violate their principles of nonviolence. Their biotechnology proved invaluable for treating wounded prisoners, and their environmental restoration techniques helped repair worlds damaged by Corvan strip mining operations. The young captain found himself changed by everything he had witnessed. The simple act of kindness shown by the Keltarans had grown into something that was reshaping the entire sector of space. He began to understand that this was bigger than military victory. It was proof that compassion and moral courage could triumph over cruelty and greed. As the final Corvan strongholds fell and their empire crumbled, the galaxy began to see humans in a new light. They were not just another aggressive species, seeking expansion, but beings capable of genuine altruism who would fight and die for strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. The war was almost over, but its consequences would echo through galactic history for generations to come. 6 months after the first human ships arrived at Keltara, the Corvan Empire ceased to exist as a major galactic power. Their fleet was scattered, their slave operations dismantled, and their leadership either captured or in hiding. The systematic campaign led by Admiral Ji-hoon had achieved something that had seemed impossible just a year before: the complete liberation of an entire sector of space from organized oppression. But the transformation that followed was even more remarkable than the military victory itself. The grateful species that had been freed from Corvan slavery did not simply return to their homeworlds and forget what had happened. Instead, they formed the Keltaran Alliance, named in honor of the gentle beings whose kindness had started it all. The alliance was unlike any political organization the galaxy had ever seen. It was built not on mutual defense or economic advantage, but on a shared commitment to the principles that humans had demonstrated during their campaign. Each member species contributed what they could to help others, and all understood that attacking one member meant facing the combined response of the entire coalition. Unji had become something of a celebrity across human space as news. Of her people's kindness spread through every colony and outpost. Her gentle wisdom and healing abilities made her a powerful symbol of what the war had really been about. She established healing centers on dozens of worlds, teaching both human and alien medical professionals the secrets of Keltaran biotechnology. So Young founded the first Interspecies Communication Institute, using her gift for languages to help different civilizations understand each other better. Her work prevented dozens of conflicts that might have erupted from simple misunderstandings, and her example inspired thousands of others to dedicate their lives to building bridges between species. Back on Keltara, the crystal beings were slowly recovering from their traumatic encounter with galactic brutality. Their natural resilience and deep spiritual strength helped them process what they had experienced without losing their fundamental faith in the goodness of life. Taemin established meditation gardens where beings from across the galaxy could come to find peace and healing. The old Keltaran elder had gained a new understanding of the balance between pacifism and justice. He taught that while violence should never be the first choice, sometimes good beings must be willing to fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. His philosophy became known as active